All right, hello everybody. Welcome to the Energy Newsbeat podcast. My name's Stu Turley, President and CEO of the Sandstone Group. I'll tell you what, we got a heck of a presentation today. It's not only a presentation, we got us a podcast. I've got a book. I've had the pleasure of interviewing Ronald Stein before on his book, Clean Energy Exploration. Exploitation.
Yes.
That was a fabulous book. I mean, I think Ronald had fun.
Yep.
And so
He told me.
Okay, good. So as a joint author, Todd Royal is here with us. Thank you, Todd.
Thanks for having me, Stuart. I appreciate it. Good to meet you. Pleasure to meet you.
Oh, we're having so much fun. I'll tell you what, Todd. When we sit back and we started interacting, you're like 12 minutes down the road.
I am.
How cool is that?
Yeah, we had moved during the pandemic from Los Angeles here to the McKinney area.
Right.
Because both my wife and our families are in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Oh, super.
Yeah, so we came back. We came home.
All right. When did you meet Ronald?
I met him. He had read some of my writings previously. It's probably about 6 years ago.
Okay.
Reached out to me and said, would I like to work with him with the American Society of Civil Engineers on their infrastructure report on energy and electricity. I really kind of became their policy director. And Ron said to me, he looked at me, he goes, I think you can do this. Go tell me how much it would cost to build a new electrical grid in California. So we could add it to the cost. And so we had a great working relationship together. And he literally just handed me the ball and said, go figure it out. And we worked really well together. And after the process was over, I approached him and said, hey, I would like to write a book. And I said, I really want to have an engineer involved. And I said, you and I have worked so well together.
Right.
We wrote a book called Energy Made Easy. And then I learned so much about the grid that we wrote a second book called Just Green Electricity, which is about what renewables do to an electrical grid and all the policy implications and all the geopolitical implications. And really what happens if you have a blackout.
What's the name of that book?
Just Green Electricity.
Okay, I'm going to go get it right now.
Okay, good. Thank you. You and hopefully about 2 million others can go get that. we would appreciate it.
This book, Clean Energy Exploitations, available on Amazon. It'll be in the show notes, and so will the other.
Thank you. And then Ron said to me, do I want to write the third book? Because Ron had done a lot of research on the regulatory requirements for all forms of energy, in particular renewables. And Ron really uncovered, we did it together, what it actually takes to build a solar panel, a wind turbine, an EV, a battery energy storage system. And then I'd done a global value chain study on lithium ion storage batteries and grid scale and what that actually means and what's the mechanical, electrical, all the engineering involved to do battery storage systems, plus the true cost per megawatt.
Right.
And so then that came about in this one. And I've said that I think I'm the most proud of this book. I love the other two, but I'm the most proud because this was the hardest book to write.
Wow.
Because it really becomes a human interest story that you really begin to find out.
Thank you.
Yeah, you really begin to find out. And if you show the cover, it's a gentleman holding an AK-47 at a cobalt mine in the Congo. Right. And so what I didn't realize until you find this out is that people are enslaved for rare earth metals and minerals all across the world. Lithium Triangle in South America, particularly like the Bolivia area, the Congo, China. People are being enslaved for these things. So when I read it, I've got 2 children. They were young children when I wrote it. And really, I kind of said...
When did you write it?
I think the book's a little over 3 years old now, 3 to 4 years old. And what really happened is that I began to go, and I get kind of emotional talking about it because I go, well, what if that was me and what if that was my children? And I put myself in their shoes, and I put myself not even in an empathetic sense, but in a sense of going, well, these are people that don't have any access to energy. They're enslaved. They're literally working in mines that collapse on them, bury them alive.
Oh, yeah.
And so it was a very, very personal story for me. Right. Because what you find out is really what we termed it is blood minerals.
Blood instead of blood diamonds.
Yeah,
I love that.
What you have now are blood minerals. There's depending on how you categorize it, there's what's called rare earth metals and minerals. Right. Lithium, cobalt.
Right. Or critical is the other.
Critical is the other word. Yeah. Copper can be there. Silver can be there.
Critical blood
Yeah, I just
started adding all.
I just call them blood minerals, because what happens is we're not doing it here in the United States or Western countries.
Wow.
And you kind of take it and you push it out. And really what I tell anybody, this is the worst form of racism. Because what you're saying is we, the light-skinned people,
wow,
you dark-skinned people, you go die so then I can drive a Tesla in Santa Monica or Dallas and feel good about myself.
You know, you're exactly running down that road that I'm preaching, and I absolutely am tired of energy hypocrisy.
Mm-hmm.
And when you in the Wales, David Blackman just released a podcast with Megan, and I have another one coming out.
Michael Schellenberger's done great work on. Yes, there was one that just washed up shore a few days ago.
Yes. And so the hypocrisy, and David Blackman just put out another note this morning about the Biden administration is taking the war on the channel of the right whales.
Yeah. Yeah.
I am just so disgusted with the hypocrisy.
Yeah. And you should be. And really, whether it's large mammals,
right,
for our enjoyment, for the
birds,
eagles, whatever it may be, when you really come down to it, you are literally looking at people being enslaved, sexual trafficking and enslavement to build solar panels and to mine the rare earth metals and minerals or critical minerals
or blood
that is needed for these to work. And what's the irony of it is that, and we talk about this in this book, every single component of a wind turbine originates from fossil fuels.
It happens.
A wind turbine can't work without the different oils and lubrications that it takes for it to work. They're literally, you might as well put up a gigantic piece of plastic. And that all comes from a fossil fuel.
It's not renewable. The steel is, the cement, and cement uses a lot of coal. Because you have to use coking coal.
You have to use coking, the arc furnaces.
Yeah.
If you're really serious about being an environmentalist, if you're really saying that I think a black life matters, a yellow life, whatever your color du jour is, the only way to stop this from taking place while being better to the environment, while lowering emissions, is nuclear power, and that's it.
Wow.
Under current technological requirements, because energy has to meet some requirements, and the only one that meets all of them is nuclear power.
Well, Todd, I always say this, and that is you must be able to deliver the lowest kilowatt per hour to all citizens of the world that is sustainable, and sustainable is defined as fiscally sustainable, as well as having the least amount of impact on the environment. I don't care if it's wind. I don't care if it's solar. I don't care if it's nuclear, natural gas, or anything else. You start going through the fiscal responsibility, you start losing wind, you start losing solar. Now, I love solar from a standpoint of a backup in a house or something like that. There's a place for it. But mandates and the disruption. So you start rolling through all this. Everything you're saying is so cool. And then you have the Marathons of the world and everything else. Let's hear about nuclear, because I think nuclear and natural gas are our best paths to a more ecological solution. Is that a fair statement?
Completely fair. To give a little background on myself, currently I work for an organization called E4 Carolinas that's out of Charlotte. It's an energy advocacy firm. I began working for them a little over 2 years ago on a U.S. Department of Commerce. Within them is called the Economic Development Administration. We are doing, myself and another gentleman are doing a global value chain study. As I always tell people, value chain is supply chain on steroids, where you look at every single component from the moment you consider something, in this case, a nuclear power plant, to the moment it's decommissioned and returned back to what it looked like previously before the power plant. We've done everything with all the components, all the parts, whether it's the siding of the plant, the reactor, the balance of plant, who's doing the power purchasing agreement, the end user, the decommissioning, the radiological waste of it, the nuclear fuel cycle, the front end and the back end. So my work has been looking at what's called advanced nuclear technology. We hear it now as small modular reactors, shrinking down a power plant down anywhere between 1.5 megawatts, which is a micro reactor, all the way up to Rolls-Royce has one that goes to about 474.
Okay.
New scale.
Right.
Does one that goes up to 462. Those are advanced water reactors, meaning they have passive safety systems. It's basically impossible for the reactor to melt down.
How does that fit into is it molten salt? Or?
That's a great question. So those are what you're really calling your generation 4 reactors, meaning it's a non-water cooled reactor.
Right.
Companies like Kairos Power, X Energy, they're doing things where you're cooling the reactor with non-water, high temperature gas, molten salts, lead bismuth, pebbles, helium. And what that means is the reactor can get up to incredibly high temperatures. Your current reactor goes about 350 to 400 degrees Celsius. You're typically only making electricity.
Right.
The higher the temperature of the reactor, these reactors are looking to get into 700 degrees Celsius, all the way up to 1200 degrees Celsius.
Okay.
Then you get some interesting things happening. When I get to 950 degrees Celsius, I can make hydrogen. I can do cogeneration plants, meaning I can do different functions at the same time.
Right.
I can do where really you get true emissions reduction is process heat and steam to make fertilizer, to make steel, to make concretes, to make plastics. That reactor gets to a much greater level, higher temperature. So it's not just making electricity. The reactor can be used for many other uses. And then what small modular means, I've taken a reactor that, let's say, you and I are here for your audience. We're here in Plano, Texas, right outside of Dallas. Right. There's a reactor in Glen Rose, Texas, about an hour and a half away from us. Right. That is a traditional, large-scale, water-cooled reactor that's getting electricity to probably a couple million people.
I believe it's like the total nuclear for Texas, I believe, is around the 4%.
Yeah, it's a low, and that's the only nuclear plant in Texas that I know. Okay. And so what you're looking to do with a small reactor is you're saying, hey, I'm going to shrink this. Right. And then what I'm going to do is do everything in a factory modularity. There's a company called Last Energy. Okay. Small modular reactor company looking to do a pressurized water reactor. Nice. They're building their components here in Texas, down in South Texas.
Oh, cool.
And if you see it, typically it's about 2 stories tall. Right. One of their reactors is kind of a module case. Right. They will then ship it on site, and it's built on site versus doing everything on the site.
Economies of scale.
Absolutely.
Boom.
So, or what engineers refer to as modular construction. Hence the name small. I've shrunk the size of the reactor physically and its electrical output. Modular, done in a factory, reactor brings in the fission process of nuclear.
This got that single controlled environment has to be able to reduce the regulatory process.
One would think, but you're having 3 problems right now with nuclear. Okay. In the United States. Right. Money, financing. I would also add, people don't want to do purchasing agreements because they can't get past the second issue, which is nuclear fuel. Right. We no longer produce nuclear fuel in the United States. Currently, this anti-Russian sentiment that goes on, if we were to say, if you've noticed, we're not have sanctions against their nuclear fuel because we bring in approximately 14 to 20% of our nuclear fuel comes from Russia.
I thought it was around that 20.
Yep.
And
it would shut down a large portion of the reactors in the United States if we put sanctions on that.
Wow.
And then the third big issue is the regulatory issue.
And then the Biden administration just shut down permitting for some of the mines that they're like, they're shooting themselves. They're pulling a Dick Cheney on the U.S. citizens. They're shooting themselves in the foot, but their splatter is hitting all the U.S. citizens.
Well, and what you really see with all these folks is this Malthusian, anti-human, anti-growth, anti-industry thought that you've allowed the environmental movement, which I would make the argument at one point was for good. The Sierra Club was for good. The Audubon Society was for good.
Patrick, Dr. Moore, I love him because I got to give him a shout out because he was
founder of Greenpeace, I believe. Was it Greenpeace or Sierra Club?
Greenpeace.
Okay,
and he was out there on Zodiacs trying to save save the whales and getting shot at by harpoons. He also was against nuclear proliferation. Sorry, Oklahoma State. I can't talk, and so. So he was against that, and my admiration for him as a human has gone through the roof. And he and Alex Epstein and soon to be Chris Wright have done a fabulous job espousing this, and it's humanitarian.
Well, another gentleman who's done an incredible job is out of Canada, a guy named Chris Kiefer.
Yes.
Chris has done fantastic work on nuclear. You're really seeing a nuclear renaissance going on in Canada.
Isn't that great? That's not the only thing that's good.
And they are doing, and Dr. Kiefer, at his credit, has led that renaissance.
Nice.
And it really shows too a little bit of advocacy work, backed up by some facts, what can really happen. And Dr. Kiefer does fantastic work. And interesting, the environmentalists, you do look at a gentleman like Michael Schellenberger.
Oh, yeah.
Who was the Time Magazine Environmentalist of the Year and is the most pro-nuclear person you're going to meet.
Right.
Mr. Schellenberger, I've had the pleasure of barely speaking to him a few times or working with a colleague of his. He's really an incredibly thoughtful man, but also a gentle soul. And for people to say nuclear is going to kill us all, it just doesn't make sense when people like Michael Schellenberger are so pro-nuclear while being so intelligent. It makes you go, no.
Humanitarian.
Absolutely. So that's a little bit of my work. That's what I've done. And these Generation 4 reactors, which the goal is you'll start seeing some of them here towards the end of this decade, possibly certainly the 2030s in the United States, hopefully in Europe, are game changers, are completely energy game changers, what they can do.
Cool.
They're game changers. Like you and I could literally witness, I've equated it to if you'd have been around and watched the moon landing, that's what you're going to see with these new reactors. You're going to see a moon landing, or if we currently in the space program were to go to Mars, you're going to see with these reactors an entirely different way to do heat, electricity, steam, honestly, the true use of hydrogen.
Enclosed system.
Yes.
So that you don't have to refuel.
Absolutely. It's a great point because you do have reactors on these Generation 4 that are called fast spectrum reactors. So typically they can use spent nuclear fuel. Some of it still has to be processed with other kind of high different forms of nuclear fuel called HALEU or TRISO X. Eventually what you want to have is what's called a breeder reactor. And a breeder reactor then uses entirely spent nuclear fuel, which what you just said, you've now entirely enclosed the process. So whatever I'm doing is not only not creating any waste, I'm creating zero emissions.
Absolutely. I'm all for that. And it's not even fusion.
No, it's not fusion, which requires enormous amounts of electricity to achieve that fusion process. Why do fusion? Where you have fission currently that anybody who didn't know about it would look at this as the miracle of this century to go, you're telling me that you can create something that has zero emissions while it's actually creating the electricity, the cogeneration, the process heat, the hydrogen, the desalinization, and then the waste that's from 50, 60, 70 years ago can use that current waste. If I were King Todd, I would put all my money that's going into those hundreds of billions in renewables, and I would put those hundreds of billions into nuclear, and you would watch a renaissance for humanity that would be unheard of.
I would agree with King Todd, except for one thing. We can't print money.
No, we can't.
And nuclear can sustain itself for so many years. My numbers that I'm coming up with, that they're saying that wind is 10 years before it's carbon net zero. Okay. That's a whole different discussion, whether or not carbon's pollution, but we'll leave Gregory Wrightstone and his whole team are great. But when you sit back and take a look, 10 years before it's carbon neutral, and then everybody says that if they last 30 years, my numbers are showing less than 8. And fiscal stability is, as soon as the subsidies run out, they are never fiscally responsible. And
they're not even close.
Not even close. So that's why you're seeing all these offshore folks not even bidding anymore.
They can't.
They can't. And then you have the Porculus bill, as Dan Bongino calls the infrastructure bill, and then the Inflation Reduction Act. And there's no inflation reduction going on.
None whatsoever.
None. And so when you sit back and take a look, you had mentioned something that kind of triggered another thing in my mind, and that is you wrote a paper on or information for Ronald on how expensive the California grid would be. That California grid's over 100 years old.
Yep.
They still probably have parts that are in there. I visited with Burning, California. I can't remember her name. I'm so sorry. But I visited with her. She was a very good authoress. And it was bad about what the California folks are going through.
Yeah.
How much would it cost to replace the California grid?
When I remember looking at that, it's called over 5 years ago. This is before. This is pre-COVID. This is pre-worker shortage, workplace development. This is pre this headlong rush into renewables, where now you're outsourcing everything overseas to places. It's Indonesia, Russia, China, etc. The starting price was about $20 trillion.
20 trillion. Our national deficit is around the 35 trillion, and we have, I believe, somewhere in this range, 5 trillion to 6 trillion coming due next year.
Yeah, so if you just look at, take someone's total electricity costs, 41 million people, you're talking about redoing everything. Now, what Ron has interestingly done, though, you're under the current regulatory regime, you'd probably be looking at upwards of 20 to 30 different regulatory permits you would need. You wouldn't have enough people to even build it. You wouldn't have enough materials that you're going to need.
You'd have more slavery, more
everything.
Yeah.
So if you were to step back and go, okay, what would you do? You would begin to repair it and or replace it piecemeal. As opposed to saying, I'm going to electrify something. You're never going to electrify. No, you're never going to. You're talking about like when the Rural Electrification Act, when that was done, that was a completely different time. You had a fourth of the amount of people in the country that you currently have. You didn't have things built where they are now. So just think about California. Think about the terrain, the topography, the mountains to the ocean. Then you need to ask yourself, you need to replace every single power line. Or do you want to put things underground? Maybe you do for fire safety. Do you want to, then you got to take in different codes for earthquake reduction. So after looking at all of that, I came up with pre-COVID, the very lowest end was 8 to 12 trillion. What I saw more realistically was 20 trillion.
What's a few trillion between friends?
Between you and me. So you ask yourself then, what's your end goal? To say, I'm going to electrify everything. What is your end goal? Any politician currently or any advocacy organization that's saying, I'm going to push electric vehicles. Okay, then you tell me, where is that energy coming from? And then let's go to your motives. Why?
I love that, because the World Economic Forum with Klaus Schwab, they have said they were going to kill half the population. I believe the U.S., and this is a rumor, has signed up for half the population to go away.
Well, if you wanted to do that, then you could really make a really good case about destroying the grid. I mean, where you and I are, people don't know this, but Texas is #1 in the nation for renewables.
Yes. And we're half the cost of California and the eastern seaboard. And we do have nuclear, we have natural gas, we have coal.
But the part that's about to get really bad is that by 2025, Texas is supposed to have 40% of all their electricity come from renewables.
Right, ain't gonna happen.
It's never going to happen. Or what's really going to happen is what just took place about a week and a half ago, when we had our first level 2 emergency from ERCOT that we've not had since the winter storm Uri back in February of 2021.
That was entertaining.
That was great. I was blacked out for 6 days.
Wow, I was at my lake house in Oklahoma.
Okay, I'll join you on the next one. You know, I'm sure you probably know, but your listeners, we were 2,000 megawatts away. For folks that don't know, a megawatt typically means about 1,000 people can get electricity. In today's world of we use more electricity, more iPhones, our refrigerators, our televisions. You get about 700. It's about 700 people typically now for a megawatt.
Unless you're talking about me, and I've got 10 screens in each of my offices.
Okay, you need your own mega. You need your own. But that's a modern. But you're a modern office. You're a modern day executive and businessman.
Right.
So we were essentially. Let's just keep it what it says it's supposed to be.
Right.
We were 2,000 people away from entirely blowing out the grid. And people go, well, what does that mean? And
it means 2,000 people would have just shut the grid down.
Yeah. So ERCOT only had, and people realize that, grids typically have 3 separate backups, spinning reserves, peaker plants, what's going into your base load.
Wow.
So anybody who says, and you'll see it on Twitter so often, folks from environmental organizations, renewables and batteries have saved the grid.
Right.
No, they didn't. And the person you just said, David Blackman, does some of the best work on this that I've read. You can get those numbers from ERCOT. They're done on an hourly basis. You can go to just Google ERCOT.
I put their dashboard on my website.
Okay, they keep great. And so it was, I think, last Wednesday. They got down to a level 2, which, to explain it for your audience, grids work off frequencies. Right. And a grid has to have so much power going in is the exact amount of power that needs to be going out. Yes, you can add a battery to bring extra, but that battery, which is lithium ion, typically can only store at most 4 hours. And I mean, the very, very most amount it can store is 4 hours.
And I have talked to a lot of battery folks, and I don't agree with battery unless it's renewable, so you can recycle the battery.
Which you currently can't.
There's only 2 manufacturers that can. But
are they using lithium?
Some. I mean, they've got new battery technology. Freyr battery out of Norway. Okay. And great people, but not all their stuff is there yet. But they're headed that way.
And that's great. If they do, fantastic. But the batteries that are on the Texas grid today
are not renewable.
They're not renewable. It's lithium.
Right.
And lithium is it can be a toxic and frankly unstable rare earth metal and mineral.
Right. We see that blowing up on the little bikes and cars.
Well, I think a better way to even look at it besides that is going, okay, it was 110 degrees in large parts of Texas.
Right.
That lithium battery, what it's going to have is an HVAC system. Right. It's not much more complicated than a fan blowing.
Wow.
So what people don't even realize is the battery itself has to use electricity to actually be effective, or it would overheat. I did a global value chain study on lithium-ion batteries at grid scale. I looked at the actual components and companies that make the HVAC system for the battery, and many times for the camera, here's the battery.
Right.
Well, here's the HVAC system just blowing air on that. And I laughingly said, well, how am I saying that thing is supplying electricity when sometimes isn't it taking electricity for the fan to cool off the battery to be able to give the electricity? And then you go to the second law of thermodynamics, that the amount that I put in is not the amount that I'm going to get out. And it overheats.
I believe it was Meredith, and I'm going to give her credit anyway.
Gosh, it makes my head spin now.
And you lose power in transmission when it goes to it.
Yes.
You lose power. Excuse me. I just spit on my own coffee. So
that's okay.
Yeah.
We're in a good discussion now.
Oh, yeah. I'm excited. We can spit over.
We're loud up right now.
Okay. And so I believe it was Meredith. And she said you lose electricity on the way in, on the way out. And then, you're describing exactly what they were seeing in Florida when the salt got into the Teslas, and then they just kind of spontaneously blow up or set fire.
Did Meredith talk about the substations? That some engineers will make the argument that you're then losing it even further. It's not even losing it twice. You're then losing it further at the substation level, and then at the level where you're having to go, AC/DC.
Oh, yeah.
Pardon me, DC/AC.
That was a great band, by the way.
Yeah, great band. But you're losing there as well. So all of that to be said is that you really have to ask yourself,
right,
that your listeners, anyone who's going to hear this, the folks that you influence, why then does Greenpeace, Sierra Club, and most every single Democrat go, this is what we want to do, when you go, the current grid, the current technology of a grid cannot handle an intermittent source of electricity, the sun, the wind, water, which we're seeing, damming issues, whether it's China, whether it was the Colorado River before the torrential rains last few years in that part of the United States. You cannot handle it. The grid cannot handle it. Texas, which people go, this is a red state. You guys got your guns. You bars are drilling for your oil and gas. No, we're not.
We're, I believe on that day that I was looking at, correct me if I'm wrong, Todd, it was, I believe there were 11 megawatts of solar, 11, whatever the number was, but the rest of it was coal, natural gas, nuclear.
That's it. Yeah, I think the number was upwards. It was at least 84%. Some would argue. I would argue it was 90%.
Yeah, how so?
Because whenever if you look at a second by second graph of electricity, remember, you have to say, what is my capacity factor versus the rated capacity? Meaning, what are you giving me right this second?
Wow.
Not what you're giving me 3 seconds from now, 10 seconds ago, what are you giving me? Because that grid has to perfectly match up at all times.
Right.
And so the only thing that is doing that is fossil fuels and nuclear. That's it.
You look at the nuclear and it's a flat line. You can count on that. And
nuclear is the highest capacity because it works about 92% of the time.
Right.
The sun's at about, I've seen about 25%. 25. It's about 25. Wind's about 35. But any of your listeners right now, even us, for the folks that are watching this, if David and I look around, Stuart and I look around right now,
I would love to be David.
Yeah, really. It would be very little wind is going on and it's cloudy. So then I have to ask the Sierra Club, Greenpeace, the entire Democratic Party, and lots of Republicans that believe this. You tell me then, where is this going to come? Where's it going to come from? As Robert Bryce says, where's the juice? I love the juice. Right? Where's the juice coming from? Great documentary. Juice. I would ask anyone, then you tell me where it's coming from. There's a gentleman.
He talks about energy density.
Energy density, of course. It's a volume versus mass. How much power are you getting out of something? Well, there's a guy called, I don't know if you know this, the gentleman name, I think it's Francis Merton, out of New York. He's got a site called the Manhattan Contrarian.
Yes. Oh, I love the Manhattan.
He wrote the most fascinating thing I've read so far about this whole thing. Whether it was my book talking about the human rights abuses. Yeah, I'm plugging that. Thank you. Yeah, let me plug it.
For our podcast.
Yeah.
Opening it up. So.
Well, Francis said something really interesting, and I thought, that's actually the best way to do it. Let's say we took the Inflation Reduction Act, which is putting in, about $400 billion of taxpayer subsidies to the wind and the sun.
And there was nothing to the grid.
Nothing grid. He says what you should do is take 10,000 people who truly believe in this. Hey, Todd, hey, Stuart, I really believe we can run the world off solar panels and wind turbines. Great, okay.
Go prove it.
He said, go build your own city.
Right.
And he said, take 10,000 people and let them live that way for 1 year.
What a great point.
I would even take it a step further.
Right.
I lived in California, lived in Los Angeles for 26 years. Right. We all know the weather is very temperate.
I know you're from Texas now.
I am. And the summer just about damn near killed me. these summers, and I was born and raised in Fort Worth.
Oh, okay.
And I went to TCU.
Yeah.
Go Frogs.
Yeah. Until they beat OSU.
Yeah. Hard national championship game. So I understand temperate weather. It never gets overly hot for that long. It certainly never gets cold.
Right.
I would say even go take those 10,000 people, put them in San Diego. The best weather one could find. It's 69 to 72 at all times. But you can only get your juice, your electricity, from a wind turbine and a solar panel.
Right.
I'm not even going to let you get a hydroelectric dam. I'll let you do some biomass. I'll tell you, let's throw some biomass. If there's a geothermal deposit, I'll let you have that.
Right.
But let's go put you in Santa Monica or Malibu.
But you're going to limit yourself to a very limited geographic around the U.S. because every place is different.
But I'm saying, just for my little experiment, I'm saying I'm going to concede to these people and go, I'm going to put you in the most temperate, lovely climate one can imagine. Because Malibu can get a little cold sometimes.
Now, are you going to be mean enough to say you got to grow your own food because you can't bring anything in from anywhere else?
No, I'm not even going to do that.
That would add to the formula.
Well, no, but what I'm saying, in this 10,000 person city, you've got to have everything that you're used to in a modern civilization.
Only on renewable.
Yeah. Okay. So your grocery store, your drugs, your kids, where do they play soccer or tackle football? Your electric vehicles, you're going to have to do an entire grid based on this. So we're going to do it. I would take those, let's take $100 billion and construct this. Right. Like the biodome that used to be.
So we get to pay for this experiment.
Absolutely. Because what you want to do, I'm an analyst. Right. And go, okay, let me show you, Mr. President, Madam Congressman or Congresswoman, Senator, CEO, Larry Fink, Michael Bloomberg. Let me show you, if you are willing to go into this experiment, Larry Fink, if you're willing to go in there, Michael Bloomberg, George Soros, and the rest of you folks that are this anti-human, anti-industry, really what they are is authoritarians. You go in there. And let's just study it, because what we may learn, what if we learn that you and me are wrong? Okay. We're wrong. Okay. Can I throw this world at you? Yeah, let's play here.
I think the World Economic Forum is already trying to do that in cities around the world. We're talking they're already doing land grabs. I mean, it's very open what they're going to do, and it is the small cities or whatever they're going to lock you into. They're already trying to put those in.
Well, I think ultimately, though, what's going to happen with that is that you will see people will revolt. Right. In the course of human history, we've seen rioting, revolts.
Rioted over energy.
Yep, they will.
And I believe Houston signed up for it.
Well, Houston continues to vote for very liberal Democrats who believe in this. But there's also Republicans who believe in this, in some of this nonsense too.
Wow, this is so cool. You are a wealth of knowledge.
So this is my experiment here, and to say you can find this out. I will allocate $100 billion, because what we're really talking about. I have a dear friend from high school. Former special forces. And I never forget, he told me when we talked about energy, and he said, well, we had a saying that went, you're only 9 meals away from chaos.
9 meals.
9 meals away from chaos. So imagine.
I'm thinking about that because he's right.
Imagine if the grid completely blew up. Boom. Okay, let's think about what you're not going to have.
You're going to have 3 years. If you take it away, it's going to be 3 years just to get the power back on.
I'll tell you what, I'll be even great about it and go, let's give you 9 months. Let's say we can get it, just the power back. How many people, and there's scenarios out there, you're looking at about, if there's, let's just take Texas. There's about 25 million Texans here right now, 27. Let's go 30. Let's make it easy. If that thing went out, you're probably looking at 90% of all urban inhabitants are going to die. The people who actually know how to camp and know how to take care of themselves is a very, very small subset. I remember my friend told me, he goes, I had training to last 1 year without anything. But he goes, a human being, even us, He goes, we're not set up in an agricultural culture.
The victory gardens are not around.
They're not around, and
Bill Gates controls the seasons.
Yep, and also too, you have to look up and go, he made a great point. So let's just talk about the grid blew up last Wednesday.
Right.
Okay, that means no water systems.
Right.
That means no sewage systems.
Right.
That means no refrigeration.
Right.
So that means I now have contaminated water, open sewage, no food.
Right.
Well, then that means too, in modern day homes that have to be taken care of, I have no way to take care of my home whether it needs to be repainted. What about you have all these open water sources?
I think you're going to throw away, Todd, painting your house when you don't have a toilet, you don't have water, and you don't have food, because you're now back down to humanity trying to survive.
Absolutely. And so
who cares about a painting of the house?
And there's a great book that talks about that. A guy named Michael, I call it one of the most important books I've ever read in my life.
Right.
A gentleman named Michael Novak, called The Spirit of Democratic Capitalism.
Right.
I would tell anyone, read the first 20 pages, but focus on page, I think it's 14, 15, 16.
Yeah. I think there was a movie made about it, and it's Shaun of the Dead, Shaun of the Living Dead.
Yeah.
That one was.
Or we see it now like with The Walking Dead.
The Walking Dead.
Or, I love that Brad Pitt movie, World War Z, which is based on a book.
Right.
Where you look up and go, what happens when, for us, I did go back to Robert Bryce, the juice thing.
Right.
So what happens if you have no access to electricity? Because even Ron talks consistently about 6,000 products come from a barrel of oil.
Right.
6,000 products. People don't realize that. Well, what people really don't realize is that to make those 6,000 products, it comes from a refinery which is run by
fossil fuels,
electricity.
Oh, well, you got to get there.
Exactly. So now even all of these things that my grid just went kaboom on.
Right.
Because I'm trying to use unstable sources into the grid.
Right.
What you're looking at is a complete meltdown of society. And I've seen estimates that show at least 9 out of 10 people perish.
Which the World Economic Forum would be happy.
Absolutely.
And that's probably why they want the small cities, or with a 15-minute city or whatever.
Yeah, 15 minutes where you can get anywhere in 15 minutes. So I think as people, you have to look up and go, you better look at how you vote.
Yes.
And I'll take this a step further. Let me be your most controversial guest right now.
Cool.
Anybody who says there's not a difference in a Democrat and Republican, I can only use the United States model, because the United States is still the leader of the liberal-led post-World War II order. The world runs off the US dollar. The world runs off the security of the United States.
Until BRICS kicks in.
Yeah, whether you like it or not, you're still under a fiat system that the US dollar is the hegemonic system, from which most transactions are, certainly energy transactions, where they go through. You understand that as well as anyone.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, you have a choice coming.
Right.
It's Donald Trump or Joe Biden.
Right.
It's not Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Right.
It's not Rick Perry, who was a wonderful energy secretary. You have got, this is what you have.
Right.
One seems to be very authoritarian, the Democratic Party.
Right.
One seems to be, we kind of like freedom.
Right.
And we're kind of willing to do some fossil fuels, and we don't really understand nuclear, but we're for it.
Right.
And that's the choices. And people need to realize all the minutia, all the whatever. I can tell you from my business alone, what I do.
Right.
What keeps nuclear reactors from being deployed, from being the saving grace of humanity, is the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
Yes, I would take it, notch it up a step.
I'm keeping it simple. I'm going to go the NRC.
Right.
If the NRC, which is not even following their own laws and regulations currently, were to get out of its way, but the problem is, and you look at it and you go, who are the people that are obstructionists? They typically vote for the Democratic Party.
Right.
Man, I grew up my parents is a Truman Democrat and a Kennedy Democrat. These things can change like that. But under today's world, where you and I are talking about now, it's like saying renewables don't work because they're just not technologically viable right now.
Right.
Maybe one day they will be.
Absolutely.
And then you and I are both in it.
You bet.
Maybe an electric vehicle will require thousands of pounds of lithium one day. Maybe somebody...
And the kids will be able to have a decent life.
Absolutely. And maybe a battery will be as big as my hand one day, and it will be nothing.
Right.
Who would have thought that you and I would live in a world where there's more computing power in this than there was in the original Apollo spacecrafts?
No, I know.
Anything is possible. But in today's world, in today's environment, with the upcoming election season, and someone go, oh my God, you're some dopey Republican, MAGA, Trump. Stop it.
Right.
Please keep your comments and the lunacy. I would go change my heartbeat in a second.
Right.
It's your policy choices.
Exactly.
And the policy choices of typically the Republican Party right now is we're kind of into fossil fuels. We'll do nuclear. We don't really understand renewables, but you better look at someone who's going to keep the grid stable, because that's where we start.
Right.
Let's keep the grid stable, and then let's go talk about all of our other differences and see if we can come to some compromises.
Oh, absolutely. But I almost want to say all politicians are, I'm more, I just believe that none of the politicians have our best interest. And I'm going to say that, if you're a candidate and you are not part of the system, I want term limits. I want all of that.
And you hear that term now, the uniparty, right? You hear that, and I think people have seen it, particularly when you see, $120 billion to Ukraine. We're talking about giving them advanced missile systems, which then you're looking at high levels of escalation according to the Russian government. Well,
why are we giving all that money to Ukraine when our poor folks in Maui need the money? I mean, our U.S. citizens are not getting taken care of. I mean, I don't get it. I would rather take care of U.S. citizens. Ukraine is a problem. I agree, but let's just leave that alone for a second. We're not taking care of that.
No, we're not. What I advocate, though, for is that, did you ever read Tocqueville's America?
No.
Tocqueville really talks about that America, when he visited, was a place where there were all these organizations, religious, civic, economic. It was very much of an engaged citizen at that point.
Right.
What I advocate for, and I go back to Chris Keeper, the gentleman in Canada, who really said, I'm going to go for nuclear power because scientifically it makes sense.
Right.
What I call for is that it actually doesn't take much for people to change Congress's mind. I've worked for congressmen before.
Oh, wow. Cool.
And interestingly enough, you'll find, if let's say you have an issue to go, hey, we want to subsidize paper cups.
Right.
It takes about 20 to 40 phone calls for people to go, we don't want that. You will be surprised, even senators. Let them get about 50 phone calls one way or another.
Right.
They're going to change their mind. And so it's not much. Go look at what it takes to get a city councilman elected. Go look at county commissioner elections. Look at state rep elections.
Wow.
It's not much. So I always advocate, whether it's energy or your civic life, be engaged. I'm going to choose.
I like that. Yeah.
I'm going to choose engagement. I'm going to say, I'm going to factually look at something and not go, oh God, I think Donald Trump is the savior of America. No, I don't know Donald Trump. I've said this to people. I'll say it publicly again. If I had to say the choice between, I bet having dinner with Barack Obama would probably be a little better experience than probably having dinner with Donald Trump.
Wow.
If you just look at them, what we know, and we don't know either man. I don't claim to know either man.
Either one would be entertaining.
But I'm talking about, if I wanted to go watch Monday Night Football, who am I going to invite? My guess is Barack Obama would probably be a little easier to be around, pretty engaging. My guess is, I bet he's pretty well versed on literature and music, and you would look at him and go, wow, what a thoughtful, fun, engaging man. And he actually, we talked about fantasy football. My guess is Donald Trump is a hard-nosed developer from New York City who is used to dealing with the grind of unions and corrupt politicians for decades. That's probably a pretty tough personality.
Trying to run over.
Absolutely. So in that regard, that's where the advocacy comes in, the being engaged comes in, because you have to say to yourself, I can sit back, well, look at what you've done. You go, I'm going to become a thought leader. Right? I'm going to do a podcast. I'm going to take this, looking at decades of knowledge and let people know, guys, you're not getting rid of fossil fuels.
No.
And so I always say in regards to all of this, be engaged.
Right.
Because it doesn't take much to win these offices. It doesn't take. No one's telling you to go run for the president of the United States. Go run to be a city councilman, a school board member, a state rep.
Oh boy, the school boards are so important. And, I'm going to see a move fairly soon. I think we're already seeing it for homeschooling.
Sure, we are.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty sad.
But I think on our topic, I think you're going to see people that are eventually going to understand that life comes from this electrical grid, and which party or parties or individuals, whether D, R, socialist, libertarian, whatever you are, who is going to say this is going to stay on so my lights can stay on?
Right.
I can go watch a little football on the weekend. I can have a barbecue. I can go get on a plane and take the family to a beach somewhere, because that grid has to stay. Right. That has to stay on. So I look at you got to be an engaged individual these days, and and I understand that can be a draining process.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. The Americans for Prosperity are a good group.
Great group.
And I just interviewed the director for Texas on here, and she is just a great lady.
That's great.
So go out to everybody, for all of our listeners here. Todd, how can people get a hold of you?
Well, the best way is that you go to my Twitter, which is at TCR. It's at TCR Consulting.
Okay.
That's really the best way to find me is do that. I've got a website that I haven't kept up with it as much since I rejoined the working world and got out of the consulting world.
Okay.
That's the best way. Obviously, our books, you can get to me through our publisher. We've got the first book, which is called Energy Made Easy. The second book, Just Green Electricity. Right. And then this one that you've been kind enough to tout for us. So I appreciate that. I appreciate you having Ron and myself on, because we do believe it's an important book, and it is definitely an agonizing book, at least from my end, because of the truthfulness that it shows, the human rights abuses that are happening.
You know, I think you can tell. I poured through this one.
I can tell.
Yeah, I mean, I just love interviewing industry thought leaders, because I learned from you. And it's kind of like David Blackman. I would like to knock his knees out from under him, do a Vulcan mind melt on him, and just pull all of his knowledge out, but leave all this personal stuff behind.
Yes.
Yeah, and you'd be one of those too. And I can't wait to have you back on to talk about other things as well.
I would love to, and thank you really to allow me the opportunity to advocate for nuclear.
Isn't that great?
Yeah, I mean, seriously, thank you very much that you've allowed this. I mean, you've got a large following where you can go. There's a new conversation. There's a new way to look at nuclear, and it truly is the safest way to run our society currently.
And I'm, instead of being known as a energy thought leader, I like to be known as a humanitarian type, because I care about humans.
Yeah,
let's elevate people out of poverty.
100%.
Again, thank you so much for showing up.
Thank you so much too.